Okay, today we're going to be talking about the being there method. We're going to be explaining what it is, when you should be using it, and answering some of the most asked questions that we get about it. Now, to be honest with you, throughout the history of this YouTube channel and my podcast and my website, I have made reference to the being there method before, but I've never actually done an entire video, podcast, or article on it. And after consulting with a few of the moderators in my private Facebook support group and just talking to a few of the people who are in there, it's become clear that the being there method is one of the most asked about strategies or techniques that we've come up with that we've yet to really give people good answers on. So in preparation for this video, I went to my private Facebook support group and I basically asked the people there, hey, what are your questions with regards to the being there method? And it became pretty obvious early on that there are some very clear patterns among the questions people wonder about with the being there method. So the way we're going to structure this video is, first I'm going to define what the being there method is. I'm going to talk a little bit about the psychology and why we find that it works. I'm even going to talk about the morally gray aspects of it. And then finally, I'm going to be looking at some of the most asked questions and giving them as in-depth of answers or responses as I can find. But first things first, before we actually get into the meat of this video, if you're looking to potentially try to be getting an ex back, or you're at that crossroads where you're determining whether you should be getting them back or you should be moving on, my best recommendation for you is to actually stop what you're doing and hop over to our website, www.exboyfriendrecovery.com. By doing so, you can actually take our Ex Recovery Chances quiz. It's a free, simple 2-minute quiz that's basically designed to answer what kind of chance you have of getting your ex back and hopefully give you some knowledge about what the best route for you is going forward. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, simply look in the description link below this YouTube video and click on the link you see there. All right, let's get to it. What is the being there method? Well, the being there method is basically a specific strategy employed if you find that your ex has moved on to someone else that can significantly raise your chances of success in getting them back. So that's the basic definition. It's basically a strategy that we teach our clients to employ specifically if their ex has moved on to someone else. Now, how do we come up with this strategy, and more importantly, how do you implement it? Well, how we came up with it was actually, truthfully, a complete accident. We didn't really have great strategies for helping people who had exes that would move on to someone else, and what we found was quite a big portion of our client base were in that exact situation. Instead, we just gave them the normal strategies that we would give to everyone else. But it really wasn't until one of our success stories tried something new that we began to notice this something new was working. So what did she try? What was it that worked for her? Well, in order to put this in a frame of reference, we need to first understand sort of the general strategy that we teach here at Ex-Boyfriend Recovery, or even my YouTube channel. So we believe in doing anywhere between a 21 to a 45-day no contact rule, and then using something we call the value ladder and the value chain. Basically, you slowly build value over conversations and different mediums of conversation. A medium can be something like texting. Another medium can be talking on the phone, FaceTime, and then of course we have the in-person medium. Think of it like this. Every single time you talk to your ex in a very specific way, you need to be building value in each one of those crucial juncture points. Now I know that's a little bit confusing, but this is where it gets even more confusing. The being there method kind of throws those rules for a loop a little bit. For example, the being there method at its core is about you purposely friend zoning yourself with your ex, which kind of goes against what we teach in the general strategy. So why does it work? So let's just take the more basic situation. Your ex broke up with you. You are heartbroken. They have basically said something along the lines of, I'm not interested in being with you anymore, I don't love you anymore, you know, the whole spiel that you typically get. They then move on to someone else. They start dating someone new and it drives you nuts. Your first reaction, of course, to that is, like pretty much everyone else, you need to try to fix it as soon as possible. So you go beg for your ex back, you try to sabotage their relationship, you do everything possible, and all it does is unite that other woman or the other man with your ex even further. This is the problem. Because most of the time, people are so reactionary to when their ex moves on to someone else, they don't really understand how the process actually works. What we found is that usually when your ex goes on the rebound, they enter into kind of a mini honeymoon period. And the worst time to insert yourself into the situation is when they're in the honeymoon period with their ex. In fact, usually inserting yourself in the situation, trying to win them back right after they move on to that rebound is the worst thing you can do, because you basically give them a common enemy to bond over. What do you do instead? Well, the first thing we learned about the being there method, and we'll get to why I call it the being there method in a moment, but the very first thing we learned is that it's actually a smart idea to give your ex a longer period of no contact if they moved on to someone else. Now, this is counterintuitive to the way we thought before 5-10 years ago. We believe that just like the reactionary issues that we're seeing, the worst thing you could do is give your ex and the new girl more time to bond together, but we found that's not true. Generally speaking, longer periods of no contact are better. Now, why is that? Well, simply put, it allows more time to go by to where your ex will not be so much in that honeymoon phase with the new girlfriend or the new boyfriend. So really, if you think about it, the first part of the being there method is to extend your no contact rule. That's why we generally recommend the longer periods of no contact in these particular situations. Something like 45 days, but as odd as it sounds, we've even seen some longer periods of no contact. Like for example, the whole being there method was spawned by a client that we had who went into 2 different periods of no contact of 30 days each. She basically went 30 days and decided after the 30 days, her ex had literally moved in with the new girl. She was devastated and she didn't feel emotionally ready to even talk to him. So we said, hey, why don't you try to do a shorter period of no contact, give yourself a little bit of an extension, 15 days. But she decided after the 15 days had gone by, she said, I need another 15 days. So technically 60 days went by before she actually contacted her ex. Now, we still don't think 60 days is the ideal time frame to be contacting your ex, because usually it gives them too much time away from you. 45 days for us seems to be the sweet spot, but it goes to show that the first part of the being there method is extending that no contact rule so that your ex isn't in the honeymoon period with the new girl anymore. Of course, this next part of the being there method is actually how the being there method gets its name. So part 1 of the being there method, extend no contact. Pretty simple, right? Part 2 is essentially to insert yourself in the middle of your ex and the new girlfriend's relationship or new boyfriend's relationship and compete directly with her for his time. Now, a lot of men and women who I explain this being there method to take this the wrong way. They take it as they need to be trying to win their ex back right away, insert themselves in the situation, be there in the middle of their relationship and ruin things. That's not what this is about. This is about actually improving that you're a better match than the other woman because you're more secure with yourself. Now, I did a lot of thinking when prepping for this video because I knew this was gonna be kind of one of the staple videos that we're gonna be telling or showing to our clients to explain the being there method. A lot of people think the being there method is just simply friend zoning yourself with your ex, and just the mere presence of you being around will annoy the other woman or the other man, and we definitely see that happening. But I don't think friend zoning is the right way to approach it. I say friend zoning because it's a pretty easy way for you to understand this is sort of what you need to do, but it's not technically friend zoning. And in order to understand the psychology of why we think the being there method works, we need to delve into attachment styles. Okay, so lately I've been talking a lot about attachment styles. I've been kind of on this attachment styles kick in the content on EBR and even EGR. But what's interesting is there's generally like 4 types of attachment styles. You have anxious, avoidant, fearful, and secure. Most of the time, people are combinations in different percentages of each one. For example, most of the time people can be secure, but they have a touch of the avoidant aspect to them. Sometimes they'll have a touch of the anxious aspect to them. And what's really interesting is we've noticed that when your ex moves on to someone else, usually that new person isn't so secure. And so this is where the being there method comes into play. If you work on yourself to mimic or become a secure attachment, meaning you will have the fortitude to deal with the fear of loss. By inserting yourself into the equation, the presence of a secure attachment of someone that he used to date or someone that she used to date, who is secure with themselves to understand, you know what, I don't care if I get them back anymore, is enough to intimidate the new person and kind of self-implode that relationship, and also kind of make your ex realize, I choose wrong. It's almost like he has or she has a direct comparison between the two options right in front of their faces. And all you have to do is be there. In other words, be your awesome self. Now, it's not as easy as that by any means, but it can be extremely effective if it's done properly. So the key component here is for you to obtain a secure attachment, because usually this strategy works best if you're a secure attachment and the new person is not, because then they don't know how to handle with someone so secure with themselves that they feel that they have the fortitude to overcome anything. Whereas they look at themselves and think, I'm not like that. This person's a threat. I need to give my boyfriend or girlfriend an ultimatum. It's her or me. And usually that doesn't wind up well for them. That's, in the essence, is the being there method. So, quick, short recap. The being there method is simply a period of time where you extend your no contact rule if your ex has moved on to someone else. And then after that extended no contact rule is up, you insert yourself in the middle of the situation and basically compete with time with the new girl, and your presence of being a secure relationship or a secure attachment style is enough to intimidate them to basically implode, and you win out in the end. Here's the fly in the ointment. This is kind of a morally gray situation. And truthfully, that's bound to happen anytime that you have a situation where your ex has moved on to someone new and you insert yourself into that situation. It's kind of icky with the cheating aspects there. So we've kind of come up with rules to help you stay out of those morally gray situations. This isn't a time where you're trying to sleep with your ex or get your ex to cheat. In fact, usually if your ex is willing to do that, it says more about the failure of a potential relationship if you get them back than anything else. Here's what you ultimately have to kind of deal with on your own though. This is a morally gray situation. I'm not gonna sit here and say this is white hat. It's not totally black hat either. It's kind of in between the two. So ultimately, you need to wrap your head around the fact that you're gonna be doing something a little icky, but effective. It's kind of a personal choice for each individual person watching this video. You could sit here and say, wow, that I can see why that potentially works, but you know, I'm not cool with that. And that's fine. You can go about your own attempt, but you can also take the other route, which is, okay, this is what works. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna give it my best shot. And if it doesn't work in the end, I'll live. You can also do that. Ultimately, it's a personal decision based on you, but I feel it's my duty to warn you that this is a bit morally gray. In the end, it's a personal choice that you have to make on whether or not you want to live your life in that realm. So let's switch gears here. This has been a long video so far, and it's not over yet because we really need to dive into the details of the being there method. So like I said, I kind of defined what the being there method is. I talked about the morally gray aspects. I gave examples, and now let's talk about other flies in the ointment. In other words, other questions that people have. Like I said, I actually went to my private Facebook support group. I asked a bunch of people their questions about the being there method. I compiled them into 3 main categories, and we're gonna talk about those 3 main categories and give as good of answers as we possibly can. So there are basically 3 questions that we're gonna answer that are complications to the being there method. The first one has to do with the being there method and its relation to moving on without moving on. If you've watched any of my videos recently, you will have seen that I've been doing quite a few interviews with success stories, meaning people who came through our program, successfully won their exes back, and were able to come onto our podcast and do an hour-long interview. And I'm always looking for patterns to see what these people are doing that other people aren't. And the one pattern I'm noticing is a lot of them get this mindset where they're like moved on before they got their ex back. In other words, they got to this point emotionally where they're like, I don't really need them back anymore. So that kind of encompasses the moving on without moving on ideal that we talk a lot about in these YouTube videos and the articles and in the Facebook group and everything like that. The question seems to be around the being there method and its relation to that moving on without moving on concept. So moving on without moving on and the being there method are two separate entities, but like anything in relationships, there is a little bit of a crossover. Like I told you, secure attachment styles. We seem to think that if you obtain a secure attachment style, which is the key to getting that moving on without moving on aspect, and bring that when you actually be there while your ex is dating someone new, that significantly raises your chances of seeing success. That doesn't guarantee success, like nothing will, ultimately guarantee 100% success, but it can definitely raise the chances. So if you're asking me if there's a difference between the moving on without moving on concept and the being there method, the answer is yes, there's a big difference, but you can actually use the concept of moving on without moving on in tandem with the being there method to get even better results. The next question is kind of a difficult one to answer. That's the concept of if you do the being there method, how can you actually be there when your ex doesn't want you there? And there's really two big points that I want to make on this concept. So just to kind of set the stage, you're doing the being there method on your ex, but your ex is not biting on anything and they definitely are acting like they don't want you there. How do you overcome that? Well, there's two kind of ideals that I would say that can help you overcome that. Ideal number one really has to do with your mindset when you come in. I've been talking a lot about the secure attachment style, and that's because it's essential to make this work. Most of the time, you'll see this kind of reaction if you aren't perceived as having a secure attachment style. The other thing I think is it can't seem like you're waiting around for them. And that's an important part of the process, because a lot of times the people that we're working with who are doing the being there method always seem like they're waiting around for their ex to break up with the girl or break up with the guy and come back to them, and it doesn't work that way. You actually need to be living your life outside of your ex as well. Almost like you just want to be friends with your ex. You just want to be friendly, and there's nothing wrong with being friendly, but I'm going to live my own life over here. It's an important distinction to make because that almost removes any of the tension or ulterior motive thoughts that he may have or she may have about what you're doing. It's almost like, oh, they're just trying to be friends. It's kind of like sneaking in their brain and then spreading the idea inception style of the being there method. But it doesn't work if they're stopping you at the gate. So you need to remove the tension as much as possible. And then finally, this is a big one. How do you deal with big pullbacks when you are well into the process? All right, so what does this look like? This looks like you doing the being there method and getting incredible results. And then all of a sudden, your ex just pulls back and you're like, whoa, what happened? We were doing so well. There's any number of reasons this can occur. And usually it's kind of go down to two. The first one is your ex's new girlfriend or boyfriend caught wind of you guys chatting and gave the ultimatum, and he's pulling back because of them. The second big reason is, in both regards, I think you're close to a big breakthrough. The question is, how do you respond to this circumstance to get the best result possible? Okay, step number one always is to make sure your attachment style perception is correct. You need to be embodying that secure attachment style. And if you don't know what the secure attachment style is, just think of it like this. You believe emotionally that you have the fortitude to overcome failure, no matter what happens. That's an important thing. And it's not enough just to sit there and say you have it, which is the case with most of the people that I work with. It's just as important that you embody it in every aspect of your life. And that sometimes means confronting failure and accepting it. So making sure you have that correct mindset is good. But when you get a big pullback like this, the initial reaction you have is to kind of try to pull them back yourself, and that's the wrong thing to do, because that just makes your ex more defensive and say, yes, this was the right decision to do. My current girlfriend or current boyfriend was correct. Instead, what you should do is pull back as well for a little bit. Think of it like this. You pull back as well, and the secure attachment style person would say, oh, they just need time. That's the mindset you need to have. Just give them time and then re-engage. Now, how much time should you give them? Well, try different time frames out. Sometimes all you gotta do is wait a couple of days. Sometimes all you gotta do is wait a week. Sometimes it needs to be a little bit longer. This is a longer process. That's one thing I forgot to mention. The Being There method is just gonna add more length to however long it will take you to be successful throughout the entire process. But remember, pull back when they pull back, and then how you re-engage is just as important. You don't want to just re-engage and act like everything's okay. You want to label and say like, hey, I know you and me are kind of having some friction lately, but I saw this really cool thing and thought you would be kind of cool with it. You need to camouflage it, but also bring the elephant in the room up so that it removes any tension and you can kind of get right back to normal after that. Now, if you don't know this concept, I've talked about this a lot in some of my latest texting videos. It's basically the concept and Never Split the Difference, one of my favorite new books that I've read in 2020. Essentially, you label your partner's emotions and it kind of acknowledges their emotion and lowers their guard, making them much more receptive to what you're going to say. So, in recap on this one, they pull back, you pull back, and then re-engage by bringing out the 500-pound elephant in the room in a very clever, smart way. The best way to usually do this is through a joke, like, hey, I know you and me are the best of friends, but hey, blah, 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 blah. You kind of get where I'm going with this. Hey there, thanks so much for watching this massively long video on the Being There method. I know it was long, and thanks for sticking around to the end. If you haven't already, make sure you take that quiz that I was talking about at the beginning of the video. If you remember that, all you gotta do is simply look in the description link below this YouTube video and click on that. Also, if you haven't liked, commented, subscribed, and did all of the stuff that all the YouTubers always ask you to do for my channel, please do that. I'll see you next time.